Chapter 6, The Internal Bath. The average person, once impressed with the truth of the statements and facts related in the preceding chapter of this book, would be likely to exclaim, "Dear me, I must get rid of this horrible condition at once. I must hasten to clean out that clogged sewer which has caused me so much trouble." Then, unless he be acquainted with sane methods, he will at once proceed to dose himself with purgatives, cathartics, laxatives, and what not pills, powders, syrups, waters, and so on, according to his lights, or want of light. Such is the natural tendency of people who have been brought up in a belief in medicines to work their bowels, victims of the pill habit. But this is not the right way. There are far better methods than these. Let us look at the matter a moment. What is a cathartic medicine? Some will tell you that a cathartic is a mild purgative. But what is a purgative? The definition is, a medicine that purges. And what does purge mean? The definition is to cleanse the bowels by frequent evacuations. Well, that sounds good, to cleanse the bowels. But does a purgative medicine actually purge or cleanse, and if so, how? To many this question may seem ridiculous, but those who have investigated the matter recognize the question as eminently proper, and know that the answer will surprise the majority of people. Let us see. In the first place, the majority of people seem to think that a purgative medicine acts in some mysterious manner, by a power peculiar to and belonging to it, thus moving the obstructions from the bowels by its own force, virtue, and power. This is not correct, for the purgative medicine has no power of that sort within itself. It can move nothing by mechanical action nor even by chemical power acting upon the fecal matter. What really happens is that the purgative medicine contains within itself elements which are repugnant to the stomach and intestines, and which act upon them as irritant and objectionable chemicals. Nature, hastening to the rescue, and being desirous of removing the objectionable and irritating substance, generates certain fluids which loosen up and lubricate the passages, and then cause a contraction of the walls of the stomach and intestines which force the objectionable matter from the system. The effect of the purgative is caused by nature's instinctive efforts to throw from the system an objectionable and harmful substance, just as it throws off and eliminates other poisons, by various channels, sometimes through the kidneys, sometimes through the skin. Whichever way is the quickest and easiest, nature uses to get rid of objectionable substances. The pain and gripes of purgatives are akin to the cramps accompanying the presence of poisons within the stomach. In fact, the purgative is a kind of milder poison. Of course, in carrying off the poisonous purgative, nature also carries away a quantity of fecal matter which has become softened and lubricated by the secreted fluids. This is the whole story. But the impacted colon is not cleansed by the process, as we shall see in a moment. The use of purgatives is deplorable, in many ways. As a well-known English physician has said, there is no habit so pernicious to the gastric digestion as systematically taking purgative drugs, and there is none more common. Purgative medicines irritate the stomach and intestines, and bring about a refusal of the parts to perform their normal functions in a natural manner. The purgative habit is acquired, and after a time the bowels practically refuse to act without the unnatural stimulus of the pill, syrup, or Pierian water. Besides this, the action of the purgative tends to cause nature to secrete and excrete a considerable quantity of fluids in order to expel the objectionable drug, which in itself is a drain upon the system, as may be proven from the fact that extreme weakness often accompanies a violent purging. There could be no weakness arising from a getting rid of fecal excrement. The weakness comes from the unnatural drain upon the vital fluids of the system. Besides the objections above urged against the use of purgative medicines, there remains another, and this equally important when the main object, that of getting rid of the accumulated debris, is considered. As we have said in the previous chapter, there may be an apparently normal passage of the bowels without an actual clearing away of the impacted fecal matter. A person may have a movement every day, and yet be quite constipated. And a person may have just recovered from a severe physicking and still remain very constipated. For remember, once and for all, that constipation means a choked and impacted colon, and not merely scanty and difficult passages. Of course, nature makes a desperate effort to get rid of the waste matter, and in her striving she manages to keep open a small channel through the mass of impacted fecal matter in the colon, through which the daily discharge passes. And when a dose of purgative medicine is taken, the stream passes through this channel, washing away but little of the hardened matter. Clearly there remains something else to be done to get rid of this mass of hardened matter impacted in the colon. There must be first a good, thorough sewer cleansing, before the afterwork of keeping the sewer free and clean is possible, and it is to this point that we have led you in our statements and explanation of the matter. If you had a pipe, channel, or enclosed gutter badly encrusted with old accumulations of filth, what would you do? Wash it out with a hose, of course. The answer is simple. And when we ask you the question, what should you do to clean out the great sewer pipe, filling nearly or quite half your abdominal cavity, possibly so distended as to be as thick through as your arm, choked, encrusted, and so packed full of hardened filth and foulness that its exhalations permeate your entire system, rendering your perspiration and breath so foul that it is plainly perceptible to others, how would you proceed to clean it out? Why, flush it out, of course, you stupid! Is your reply. Yes, that is the answer, flush it out. And that is just the process that is accomplished by the internal bath, of which we shall now proceed to tell you. The principle of the internal bath, or colon flushing, has received much attention from the Western writers and teachers upon the subject of hygiene, and from the general public, during the last 20 years, and many have received wonderful benefits from an observance of its principles. Several persons, in different parts of America, have claimed to have made the discovery, but the chances are that they all worked out the problem independently of the others, and consequently all are entitled to the same degree of credit. As a matter of fact, though, these discoveries were rediscoveries of an old principle well known to the ancient Hindus, and other Oriental peoples who practiced it centuries ago. Nay, more, it is believed that primitive Aryans received their first lessons on the subject from some of the long-billed birds of Oriental countries, who are said to have practiced this method in order to relieve themselves of constipation consequent upon the eating of certain berries growing in those countries. One of the old writers insists that the method was learned from an observation of the habits of a long-billed bird dwelling on the banks of the Ganges, which was noticed to insert its bill in the water, and after filling the bill with a quantity of the fluid was seen to inject it into the anus for the purpose of bringing about an action of the bowels. Various species of the snipe family are said to have similar customs. Pliny has written that this habit of the bird suggested the use of clysters to the ancient Egyptian doctors, and certain Chinese historians have claimed the same thing in their own country. So the practice seems to be universal, and having its origin away back in the early days of man's sojourn on this planet. But there is a great difference between the ordinary Western methods of giving injections of water by means of the syringe, and the Hindu yogi methods. The ordinary Western methods consist of administering a small amount of warm water into the rectum, or lower end of the colon, thus clearing away the debris from that region which had been clogging the lower end of the colon. This was an excellent thing, and far preferable to the practice of administering cathartics, etc., but the Hindu methods go much further, and accomplish far greater results. The internal bath, which is often styled flushing the colon, consists of the injection of from 1 to 2 quarts of hot water into the colon, thereby removing the mass of accumulated and dried feces which have been poisoning the system, and which also has a tendency to give a mild flushing to the kidneys, as we shall see as we proceed. Now all this seems so simple, that one who has not investigated the matter may be apt to consider that so simple and plain a process could not have been overlooked by Western physicians and hygienists for so many years, and that therefore there must be something wrong about the matter. But, alas! Like many other things, it was too simple to have been thought of, particularly as the Western medical profession, up to 20 years ago, had not informed themselves regarding the dangers and frequency of the impacted colon. The few physicians and others who had acquainted themselves with the subject, were hooted down as quacks, and ridicule was meted out to them until a growing interest in the subject caused the profession to sit up and take notice, and then investigation proved the soundness of the idea and method. Many of the plain people of America who followed the Thomsonian system of medicine, about 60 years or more ago, and who obtained splendid results by their system of sweating and vomiting the patient, thus getting rid of the poisonous matter in the system which had not been eliminated, and which caused the disease, also combined with their other methods that of the large enema, or injection of hot water into the rectum and colon, by means of the ordinary syringe of that day. The amount injected was usually about a pint, but some of the more radical ventured to use a quart of water, which was quite unusual on the part of the medical profession and public generally, and which was regarded as a heroic treatment frowned upon by the regular physicians. About 1850, or perhaps a little earlier, one Dr. Jules Shaw, in his little water cure manual, recommended the full injection. He said, among other things on the subject, by a thorough washing out of the lower bowels, the peristaltic or downward action of the whole alimentary canal is promoted, and by the absorption or transudation of water, its contents are moistened or diluted and the whole of the abdominal circulation completely suffused by that plainest and most soothing of all fluids, pure water. And even before that time, say about 1825, Dr. Presnitz, the eminent water cure advocate and practitioner, mentioned this among other subjects, as having produced the most satisfactory results. But, these earlier practitioners and writers do not seem to have discovered the fundamental hint or idea, the frequency and danger of the impacted colon. Their methods were directed toward the lower end of the colon, particularly the sigmoid flexure, that peculiar curve or twist of the colon just before it terminates in the rectum. See diagram. And so their methods, while excellent insofar as they went, did not reach the real source of the trouble, except incidentally. Perhaps the first Western man who really saw the value of the treatment and method was Dr. Wilfred Hall, of New York City, a clergyman and scientist, the author of numerous religious, scientific, and philosophical works. Dr. Hall was broken down in health, and in his desperate endeavors to regain strength and health he experimented along many lines. Almost by accident his attention was directed toward the colon, and he soon discovered the source of his troubles. He began treating himself, and the results amazed him. In a short time he was again hearty, well, strong and vigorous. Then he tried his treatment on some friends and acquaintances, with like results. Finally, feeling that such a discovery would benefit the general public, and having also the American business instinct, he published in 1880 his experience and his method in the shape of a small booklet, which he entitled the Dr. A. Wilfred Hall's Health System. He sold thousands of his systems for prices ranging from $4 in the beginning, to $2 about 10 years later. Through Dr. Hall's efforts thousands of families were made acquainted with the system of flushing the colon, and others have since passed on the knowledge to others, but there are still millions of people who need this knowledge today and have never heard a hint of it. Another early teacher and practitioner of this method, was Dr. H. T. Turner, of Walla Walla, Washington, from whom we have quoted in the preceding chapter. But, like many other valuable methods and systems, this one of flushing the colon was overworked by some of its zealous advocates, and turned into a fad. Some of the more radical advocates have gone so far as to claim that one should not bother about natural movements of the bowels, at all, but should rely entirely upon the flushing process, repeated once or twice a week, in order to keep clean the bowels. Now, at this point we wish to protest. We consider that a condition of that kind is as abnormal and unnatural as that brought on by the pill habit, and we advise strongly against any such fanaticism. There is nothing gained by getting away from nature methods, and much to be lost. If men lived in the natural state, there would be no need for the internal bath at all. But, so long as they have allowed the unnatural condition of the impacted colon to be established, then they must use the next best method to remove the obstruction so as to allow nature to assert her sway once more. And we know of nothing half so good as the internal bath, or flushing the colon, and that is why we so strongly recommend its use. But after the normal condition is once re-established, then the person should lay aside the method, except for occasional use, as hereinafter stated, and should let nature carry on her own work, aided and assisted by the use of the proper amount of fluids taken during the day in the shape of pure drinking water, etc., full explanation of which has been given in a previous chapter. So you see that we are not advising the constant use of the inward bath by means of flushing the colon. In fact, we are urging the contrary. But before nature can assert and re-establish her authority, the abused, choked, impacted, obstructed, encrusted colon must be flushed clean and pure, and thus placed in a condition whereby nature will be able to perform her natural functions. How to apply the method? The method of taking the internal bath, or flushing the colon is quite simple. To those who occasionally have it administered to themselves, or others, the ordinary injection or enema practically no additional instruction is necessary. To those who never have administered an injection, a few words of instruction may be necessary. Those who are familiar with the common form of injection, or enema, should remember, however, that there is a radical difference in the underlying theories of the two systems. In the old method of administering an injection, the idea was that there was an accumulation of fecal matter in the rectum, and in the folds and curves of the sigmoid flexure that lie just above it. See diagram. Consequently, there was no necessity for injecting more than enough water to dislodge the obstructing mass, a pint being found sufficient for this purpose. The rectum and the sigmoid flexure may be cleansed by the injection of from 1 pint to 1 quart of hot water. In fact, that is about their capacity, a larger amount rising above the curve of a sigmoid flexure. The old practitioners of the water cure doubted whether water could be injected above that point, except by a great pressure, and at any rate doubted the wisdom of attempting the same, their judgment being influenced by the belief that the clogging up was confined to the parts reached by their treatments. But the later investigators, recognizing the fact that the colon could, and did, become clogged and encrusted along its entire length, and having found that much larger amounts of water could easily be injected into the colon, until its entire length was flushed, began to increase the amount of water injected. 2 quarts was the amount generally agreed upon as the proper average quantity, although some enthusiasts tried 3 quarts, after practice, and Dr. Hall went so far as to habitually use 4 quarts, or 1 gallon, in his regular treatments. But, personally, we do not approve of these large quantities. We think that 2 quarts will do the work as well as more, with less inconvenience and discomfort. In fact, we suggest that injection of but 1 quart at first, adding a little more each time, until the full amount of 2 quarts is reached, at which point let the quantity rest unchanged. The syringe. Any ordinary hand syringe will answer the purpose. A cheap one may be procured from the druggist at the outlay of not over 50 cents, the better grades costing more. But better results may be obtained from the use of a fountain syringe, which is suspended high above so as to get the force of the flow of water. The process. In the ordinary enema, the object is simply to cleanse the rectum, and about a pint of water is injected, and then voided almost immediately, sweeping away the hardened excrement with it. But in flushing the colon, the object is to inject the water gradually so that it will mount up past the sigmoid flexure, and onto the other parts of the colon, there to be retained for a reasonable time that it may soften and dissolve the hardened fecal matter. The position. Use your own inclination and preferences in the matter of position. Some take the injection in a kneeling posture, while others prefer to lie down. In this latter case, we suggest that you lie on your right side, this being the position indicated by the position and location of the colon. The injection. Insert the injection point of the syringe in the anus. A little oil, Vaseline, or soap will render this easier. Then allow the water to flow in gradually and slowly. If you are a beginner, will you experience an instinctive desire to void the water at once? But a little exercise of the willpower will cause this inclination to subside, particularly if you check the flow for the moment, not withdrawing the injection point however. Then after a moment resume the flow. If the inclination to pass the water becomes too strong, you may discharge the water and what it carries away with it, and then proceed with the injection. A little practice will soon enable you to overcome this difficulty. As we have said, 1 quart is sufficient for the first trial. After it has been injected, remain quiet, in a lying position if convenient, gently rubbing and kneading the abdomen with the hands, this process tending to loosen the impacted fecal matter. The evening, just before retiring, is perhaps the better time for applying the method, although some prefer the morning. The water. The proper temperature of the water used for the injection may be regulated by the feel of the hand. Let it be as hot as the hand can stand without discomfort, about the same temperature that you would use in washing with hot water. Final. In passing out the water, do not be in too much of a hurry. Let it take its time. You will find that at first it will seem as if it were all out, but a little later you will find an inclination to pass more, which may be assisted by rubbing the abdomen from right to left. Sometimes, say 10 minutes after you have concluded the operation, there will be felt a final inclination, and the last of the water will pass from you, particularly if you walk about a little. The first few times you flush the colon you will be surprised, and perhaps disgusted, to perceive the character of the fecal matter that passes from you. In some cases great lumps of old excrement will be passed, much of it covered with a green, coppery mold or rust. In other cases lumps almost as black as coal will be noticed, all of which will show you the truth of the statements herein contained regarding the old, hard and impacted fecal matter which has been poisoning your system. Effect on kidneys. Sometime after the flushing, you will notice that you will pass more water than usual from the kidneys, the water having passed from the colon to the kidneys by means of absorption. Some practitioners advise that after the final passage of the water from the rectum, you inject a small quantity of hot water, and retain it, the result being that it will be taken up by absorption, and the kidneys thus given a beneficial flushing. Miscellaneous notes. Some who have practiced this treatment have found that in cases of extreme constipation and congested colon, the addition of a tablespoonful of glycerin to the hot water worked excellent results in the direction of softening the impacted fecal matter, lubricating the walls of the colon, etc. Many persons ask whether the treatment is not weakening. To such we say that the extended experience of leading practitioners have shown that it has a contrary effect, a marked feeling of increased vitality being manifested by persons taking the treatment, after they have restored normal conditions. It does not weaken the intestines, but restores normal functioning to them, by reason of removing the obstructing materials. The natural question is, how often should this treatment be applied? The answer is that at the start it would be well to apply it 3 nights in succession, then 3 times more every other night, then 3 times more every third night, then 3 times more once a week. After this time a normal condition will have been restored, and by following our instructions in the preceding chapter regarding the drinking of a sufficient amount of fluids, one should be able to keep his colon in good condition. To those who do not take sufficient exercise, or who are confined to indoor life much of their time, or who, in other ways, are unable to live naturally and normally, we would suggest the benefit of a monthly treatment to prevent future returns of the old conditions. It would be well to set some particular time of the month, say the first or the middle of the month, for such treatment, as one is more apt to remember such a set time when it comes around. Some practitioners of this form of treatment recommend that after the treatment with hot water is completed, and the contents of the colon fully evacuated, it is advisable and helpful to inject a small quantity, say 1 pint of water of the ordinary cold temperature, into the colon for the purpose of invigorating the colon and adjacent parts. The tonic and invigorating qualities of a cold douche, or treatment, after an application of hot water, is well known, many persons always taking a cold sponge after a hot bath. The practice of the cold douche or shower, after the hot bath, being a well-known feature of the Turkish bath also. We mention this for the instruction of those who may favor or prefer it. It is not necessary, however, and may be dispensed with without loss.